Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Jack McGuinness. Jack is an executive team coach and co-founder of Relationship Impact, a consulting firm focused on helping organizations build great leadership teams. He is a former Army officer, author, teacher, and entrepreneur. He is the author of a new book called Building Great Leadership Teams, a practical approach for unleashing the full potential of your team. Now, in this book, Jack helps readers recognize that they don't have to live with an average or dysfunctional leadership team. There is a better way. So I'm excited to have him on the show to learn from his experience on this subject. So Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. Great to have you on the show. And I'm really interested in this subject, this book. So first of all, before we get into the book and what in your company, tell us about your background. How did you go from being an Army officer to a leadership team coach like you are today? And
I won't bore you with all the details, but there is a sort of a method to the madness kind of thing that and certainly I didn't plan on being an executive team coach at any point in my career until about 10 years ago or so. But, I got very fortunate. After I got out of the Army, I got my MBA and I was looking for a job. And I got very lucky. I got connected with a partner from Deloitte, who's about 15 years older than me, who was building his own consulting firm, management consulting firm. And I became one of his first employees.
Nice.
And so I had the benefit of not only learning how to be a management consultant, we were a general management consulting firm, did large scale restructuring type of work, a lot of traditional management consulting work. But I also had the opportunity to watch him and then participate with him in building a business. And that was very, very cool too. So I got two great experiences at a very early age, and learned how to be a consultant. Most of the people we hired in after me were PhDs in psychology, masters in organizational behavior. And so I learned. I was a engineer with an MBA, very, right brain, linear thinker. And I learned a lot from these guys that were, thought a lot differently from me. We butted heads, but, eventually I wound up listening and learning. And so that experience was awesome. And then, for various reasons, I left that firm and bought another company with a couple of passive investors. And, I became the CEO of a contract packaging company, light manufacturing. I know you're deep in the manufacturing.
Yeah.
This was very light, non-sexy production stuff. But we did a good job turning a family-run business around. But we did packaging for Unilever, Godiva, and did some good stuff. But got destroyed in the financial crisis in 2008, and the contracts weren't so good, so the companies pulled a lot of their contracts back in house, and so long story short, we went bankrupt. So the only reason I bring that up is because the experiences of being in the military, learning how to lead at an early age, and learning from people that were a lot older than me and that reported to me, but were really kind of more my partners in crime than anything. And then, learning how to work with a lot of different companies over a course of a 13-year career, and building another company, and building that consulting firm with a few very smart people was great experience. And then learning through crisis of going through a bankruptcy was, not that I would never encourage anyone to go through anything like that. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I learned a lot from it. And I think it helps, all of those experiences help me be a more empathetic and reflective leader, or helper of other leaders as I work with them on their executive team journeys.
Yeah. So you have the experience and the scars of what it's like to be in their shoes when you're coaching other executives, because you see what it's like because you've been in their shoes building companies.
Yeah, and I have the humility that I think is that I've gained over time. I was, a lot younger, probably not quite as humble, but those experiences do humble you, and they give you perspective, and I think that enables me to be more effective at what I do now for sure.
Fantastic. And what about your lessons that you learned in the military? Do you see yourself applying some of those lessons in the work that you do, helping other companies?
Yeah, I mean, I was with the 10th Mountain Division, which is, a small unit tactic, in its essence, a small unit tactic entity I was an infantry officer. So um, what I think people misconstrue about the military, particularly the Army, is that it's very command and control driven, and that is true to some respect. But the autonomy you get as a young leader, and the input that you have as a young leader, it was pretty remarkable to me. And the other thing is that you you were at West Point. I was told I was the greatest thing that ever happened. We all kind of were, and then you realize like you don't know everything, right? And so I think the biggest thing as I learned is that I really didn't know as much as I thought I did, and it was very humbling. But it also I had enough preparation where I was able to put my thinking that I got from college to in play, and just really learned from a group of non-commissioned officers, really, that are the lifeblood of the military, in my opinion. And so that humility of leading, but also being a servant to the people that work for you. I've kind of always, I haven't always lived up to it, but I've it's something that's always my guide rails, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think unless you've been in '01 and you show up to your command and you're
Mm,
looking at people that are that have been in the military as many years as you've been alive, and and much more qualified and much more experienced, yet you're in charge. If you've
yeah,
never been in a situation like that, I tell you, it's a very humbling experience.
very humbling.
And you learn about how to respect people, how to listen to
Yeah,
people, how to ask good questions, and
yeah.
then the other thing is to do your job very well. Like there are
Yeah.
certain things that only the leader can do, and you need to figure out what those are and to make sure you're taking your responsibility and getting those things done right for your team. So you're standing
And
up
you
and you're
screw it
protecting
up,
your team.
and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
and you learn
absolutely.
from it, and and that's the that's it. In I was in peacetime, right? So it was the stakes weren't quite as high. So you were able to learn without killing anyone. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's I just reflect back on that time, with some anxiety. So obviously, I think the less it was foundational for me as in the journey I happened to take.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, myself as well. Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about your company, Relationship Impact. What do you and your team do, and what makes your company unique? What makes
Yeah,
you
so
special?
there's two of us. I have a partner, Gil Brady, and we met each other at West Point when we were 17, and we've been very close friends, and almost brothers, frankly. We were both going through big transitions about 14, 15 years ago, and we put our heads together and came up with this concept that we thought we had something interesting to say about teams and team dynamics. And so, we took various fits and starts, but what we have settled on is we work with the executive teams of young, growing companies that have established teams. Not that they're not doing it, they're not still selling and executing and doing, they're more established companies, but still young and growing. And we help them mostly reflect back and take a step back and look at their teams and say, are we an accelerator for the organization, or are we holding the company back unintentionally?
Mm,
And oftentimes that's the case. There's the pace of change, the pace of scaling a company, as you know, is hard. It puts pressure on relational dynamics. It Structure doesn't always keep up with scale,
yes.
and that there's that constant balance between, do we have the right structure in place? and have we damaged our relational dynamics? And so, long story short, we work with executive teams to help them build the teams that they aspire to be.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're right. It's a big challenge. It's in the early stages when you have a founder and you have a founder's intent, everything seems to go in the right direction. But as you grow and the founder can't, do everything, or sometimes the founders hold on too tightly, and they're not able to pass it off to the various, teams as they grow and they scale. It can be, and then you might have family members that are on that leadership team, or you might have, depending on
that's a nightmare usually.
So you have all sorts of interesting dynamics of where did this team come from, right?
Yep.
It was the team you needed to get to where you're at, but
exactly.
It's not necessarily the team you need to go to the next level.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean you have to get rid of anyone necessarily. Maybe that's the case sometimes, but you do need to step back and say, how are we helping the organization get to where it needs to go? And oftentimes we help teams recognize that maybe they are getting in the way of that development. And oftentimes it's the CEO, bailing people out, having too much control or whatever. There's a whole bunch of, dynamics that get in the way for sure. I think what we're unique at, you asked that question. We are far from theoretical. Gil has a PhD in leadership, so he's got some theoretical foundation. So the work, the tools and the techniques that we use definitely have some theoretical foundation to them. But I think our clients would say that we're very pragmatic, very, very practical, and we're able to shift and recognize that their team and their environment is a little bit different than the teams that we worked in the past. We never look at one team the same as some other team because the environments are just totally different.
That makes sense.
So I think pragmatic is the word I would use.
Excellent.
Not shy either. We're definitely not shy of we're also not afraid to admit we're wrong, but we're not shy about giving our 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes you're right. I think sometimes when you have for me at least, being CEO of my own business, I do appreciate outside counsel, right? So because you see the world like just in the lens that you have, like this is your baby. You started from nothing, right?
Yeah.
So you see all the history of it, and so sometimes you need someone to be just really radically honest with you and give you the full, like, you've got an issue here and you need to solve it. And I think that advice is really critical for founders, for CEOs, for, in companies. They need to hear that outside advice. Sometimes we get kind of stuck in breathing our own fumes. So I think that's really important. And you guys sound like you offer that candid advice.
We do. And and we're also not afraid to say, hey, look, we may have gotten that one wrong too, so.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's talk about, you've got a new book out called Building Great Leadership Teams. Tell us about the origin of the book. Why did you write this one?
Yeah. So, I started writing about 7 years ago for Chief Executive Magazine. I write sometimes every month, sometimes every quarter. It goes up and down, but I started writing regularly. And about 5 years ago, I was like, there's probably something here. And Gil encouraged me to put it down in words. And I had a former client that said, you probably should put this in codify it a little bit. And so that's really what it is. That's kind of the genesis. And then, as you know, having written a bunch of books, and then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to write a book. And then it took me 3 years to even think about actually getting a publisher and going through the process. But I finally did it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so I'm imagining that some of the reasons for wanting to put this down into a book is based on some of the struggles you saw with organizations that you were around, either that you were a part of or that you counseled. what were some, what were some of those unnecessary struggles you saw that you wanted to make sure that you pointed out in the book?
Yeah, they range from everything from um, you know uh, CEOs putting a team together, and it's really a team in name only. It's a bunch of direct reports that are reporting back to the CEO, and there's really no team to it. It's the CEO and each direct report, and sometimes they work together when they have to, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And the CEO winds up doing a lot of the heavy lifting, of integration, right? And so that's a I call that the what we say is like it's really important to move from a staff uh, kind of construct to a team construct. So a
Mhm.
lot of the work we do is often like, okay, you're a team, you call yourselves a team, but you don't have the real elements of what a team does, right? And so we help, and so there's that, and then there's a lot of stuff like a CEO being like Charles Atlas and holding up, the company, and you have team discussions, but those discussions don't really result in much. There might be a decision made that the CEO finally says, but yeah, let's go that way. And then there's a lot of lobbying of the CEO after the meeting, and the
Oh, yeah.
CEO engages in the lobbying rather than says, hey, wait, we made a decision here. Raise your voice in the discussion and talk to your colleagues about what your objections are rather than having to rely on me. Um, the, and then there's like, there's this, it's an overused buzzword, but the silos and uh, that are evolve over time because leaders have different mindsets of operating,
Yeah.
and those mindsets of operating bleed down
Mhm.
into the rest of the organization. So, you got sales and delivery are not not on the
Not
same
aligned.
page,
Yeah.
right? And so it's fine not to be on the same page, but when it becomes like this, we can't
Yeah.
unstick it, then it becomes a problem. And it inevitably, when you look back up, the two leaders are just not in sync, right? And so those are just some of the dynamics that happen. I'd say, like, everyone asks me all the time, like, what gets in the way of teams being as good as they can be? And I'd say it's their inability to have what we call productive dialogue, or have important, tough conversations about the most important stuff they're facing in a way that moves the issues forward rather than sticks them in cement. And that we see that all the time, and it's it's passive aggressive behavior. It's, the
Yes.
elephant in the room we're not
Yeah.
talking about. It's the lobbying thing with the CEO. It's a whole people saying, yeah, we'll do that, and they never do it. There's a whole host of stuff that goes on.
Yeah.
An inability for the team to hold itself accountable without just the CEO. There's lots of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mentioned before we got started that I've run, this is my ninth manufacturing business I've run, and every time I take over a new manufacturing business, there's a leadership team,
Yeah,
and I come in as the new VP GM type of thing, and so every one of those things you mentioned, I've
I'm
seen
sure.
in leadership teams,
I'm sure.
and so my question is like, all right, how, and so this exists and I've seen it,
Yeah.
so you're not telling me something I don't know. So then the question is, how do you go about fixing it? How do you go about building, taking this group of people that have a team in name only, and building them and shaping them into an actual leadership team?
There's two things out of the starting gate, or three things out of the starting gate. Our sales cycle is pretty long because we don't get engaged until the client's comfortable and we're comfortable. It's an
Right.
intimate relationship. The client has to be comfortable,
Yep.
and not just the CEO, but most of the direct reports have to be comfortable that we're not working on behalf of just the CEO. We contract with the team, not just the CEO,
I like
and
that.
that is a different dynamic. It definitely is. So we spend a lot of time up front creating and we're pretty good. This is something we're pretty good at. We get people feeling pretty comfortable that we're not out to do anything other than help the team, not any one individual, the team. That's number one. The second thing is we spend then, when we do get engaged, spend a lot of time with the CEO up front to help them think through what things they need to do differently than they've been doing to build the dynamics, right? And so that could be anything from, and so what that is like, you got to start modeling different behavior. So the number one thing that gets in the way of a CEO starting an initiative like this is listening, right? If they get in a discussion about, I open up the floor and say, what's going on with the team? We do a diagnostic, and people look and say, well, people don't feel like their voices are heard or whatever. And the first reaction out of the CEO is, what do you mean the people don't get a voice? Then the dialogue gets shut down. So because that's power, right? And power means something. And so modeling is huge, right? And that could be the other end of the spectrum too. Maybe they're not, maybe they're enabling some stuff that happened that they need to stop enabling, like the lobbying thing. So some people come to lobby their office, they put their hand up and say, hey, look, have you talked to Bob? Before you come in the office, talk to Bob. And if you can't resolve the problem, I'll help you deal with it. Those kind of things. But they have to start modeling something different so their team says, okay, this is real. This is not just another flavor of the month kind of crap.
You touched on something, and I saw it too throughout my career, is that our presence as leaders changes dynamics.
Yes, it does.
A lot of times, just being in the room will affect things differently. And we've got to be careful of how we, like you said, we can sometimes dominate conversations just by saying, well, I think, and then everyone's like, oh, okay, well, Rennie thinks this, so we're all going to move in this direction. So it's really hard, because oftentimes too, we actually know the answer. But we really want the team to work it out, or to see where they come up with, because it might actually be better than your own personal answer. So
and
sometimes you have to hold your tongue as a leader, as a CEO.
Well, and sometimes, if you're trying to create a scenario where people actually feel like they can say, hey, look, we screwed this up, or we're not looking at this the right way, and do that authentically. If the CEO isn't open to that kind of dynamic will never happen. And we see it all the time. You see it all the time. And then there's, on the other end of the spectrum again, enabling passive aggressive behavior. You just can't, your presence is important, but you have to, it's self-awareness is what it is. It's helping CEOs become more self-aware of how they're impacting the team dynamics positively and potentially negatively. And without doing that in the beginning, look, we've learned from mistakes, right? When we first started doing this, we didn't do enough of that. And we're like in our, first couple of meetings, and the CEO has totally set us back, 3 months because, and because people are, look, see, I told you that he wasn't going to listen to us, and that's really not his intention. But he hasn't checked himself yet. So I'd say those are the two things, like getting the team to be comfortable that we're out for the team, getting the CEO to model. And then the third thing we do right out of the starting gate is we have a third-party instrument used to do a diagnostic of, 7 structural characteristics of a great team, 7 relational characteristics of a great team, the integration of those things. And we have the team take it, we have their direct reports take it. And if there is a board, we have, at least some members of the board take it as well. So there's a, sort of a 360 view on how the team is viewed. And we use that as a discussion starter for, look, this is what you guys are saying and your folks are saying is getting in the way potentially. What do you think? Where should we start? All right. And so, and that, we use that discussion is just so invaluable, because you see the dynamics at play, even in that discussion. People not saying anything, people being really aggressive on one point, like just there's a lot of this is relational dynamics. There's no question that have been burned over time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what does it look like when you've got a great leadership team and it's running well? What does it look like? What are some of the characteristics of it?
Yeah, I'd say there's a few. I'll just give you a few things right out of this starting gate. Number one, it's that the members of the team recognize that the team and the organization is most important, not their functional responsibilities only. Obviously, that's a tough dynamic. I run sales, I get paid for sales, I get whatever, right? And now you're telling me I got to look out for the best interest of the team. Like I get that, but let's change the incentives then. I mean, because if you're really going to have a team, and sales is going to support, the drill. So it's getting people to have a greater good sense of why we're in this, because being a leadership team member is different than being a functional leader. And so that's easy to say. That's very hard to move to. I see it every day. I'd say the second thing is that what does it look like is that the team is laser focused on what's most important. They're laser focused on results and what's most important, the most important priorities. They don't get bogged down in trivial bull. And it's amazing to me when I see, and look, I look back at myself, and when I was the CEO of that consulting firm I was telling you about earlier, I did sophomore trivial stuff too, because I felt slighted or whatever, but that stuff, if we spend time on why did she do that to my group, or why did he do this, we are being a decelerating function for the organization. And so, being laser focused means setting aside some stuff that may bug the hell out of us sometimes, but we have to look for the, again, up to the greater good. I think, and related to that, the third thing is that great teams are able to confront each other well, disagree well, without just having the CEO resolve the challenges for them. So having adults being able to disagree with each other is, again, so all three of those things I just mentioned are easy to say, but they are the essence of what makes a great leadership team from our perspective. But they're really hard. They're really hard. So you got to be intentional about them.
That's one of the things I mentioned in my second book, All in the Same Boat, this idea that the enemy is outside the hull. Trying to get people to recognize that the enemy is not, it's not the engineer, it's not the navigator, it's not, we're in it together. We have a common mission, like you said, common greater good. We have a mission, and we're not going to achieve that mission if we're fighting inside the hull, right? And so, part of is I took on businesses, in outside the military was the enemy's outside the four walls is the expression I would use, is that
I love
inside the four walls.
I got to read that book. Yeah. I love that, because I never thought about it like that, but that's it right there. Yeah. Let's not shoot ourselves.
Right. We're but one thing you said that's really interesting, and I've never heard it put this way, is you said being an effective leadership team member is different than being a functional head.
Oh, God, yeah.
I've never heard that put that way. And that is something that is got me thinking, because you're right. If you want to be part of an effective leadership team, you're in it for the greater good. You're in it for the common mission. You're not just in it to protect your people or your slice of your function, whether it's sales and marketing or production or quality. You're in it for the big picture, is what are we trying to do as a company in the world? Right. And when you're focused on that greater good, you think differently about your role as sales the head of sales when you're thinking
You
about the greater
you
good.
really do, and you take a long-term view. Look, I know all of the. I'm sure people are listening to this like, yeah, right, sure, but so the dynamics on any team, the things the CEO has to balance all the time, and I would argue that the team ultimately has to balance all the time is, do we have the right structure in place and the right relational dynamics in place to have a really cohesive team that's able to do those three things that I just talked about. So structure in this case, as we're talking about this sales, VP example, right? Like, so maybe the incentive structure's like just warped, right? And so can we address that? Right? Can we deal with that? And maybe because of the structural issues, the VP of sales and the VP of execution are at each other's throats because he's selling stuff that may be beyond the skis of the people that can actually deliver, but the delivery people aren't actually contributing to helping with the sales the give and take. So can we get the right, have we had the right conversations about the structure and the relational dynamics that are getting in the way of us being as good as we can be? And it's that power balance. It's the equivalent of, are we too focused on performance? Or are we too focused on culture? Right? Are we too focused on structure? Are we too focused on being nice to each other? That it's that constant balance, and it's never easy. And it's a changing calculus because environments change. New people get added to a team, we grow, and it's never static. Right. And so it's hard. It's hard to have a good team all the time. And there is never a great team all the time. But those that aspire to be great have a much more likelihood of getting there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you don't set your focus to get there, you're never going to get better, right?
Right.
Just stay, like you said, ordinary and conflicted and dysfunctional. If you don't say we want to get better and here's a direction we're going. Maybe you're not perfect all the time, but you're heading directionally.
Yeah, no one's perfect all the time. People get mad. Structure, you outgrow the structure. But I will say that the one thing you just mentioned triggers something for me is like CEOs particularly address team dysfunction with structural issues because they're the easiest thing that come to mind. It's what we learned in business school, right? And so we'll fire that person because or we'll move them out, or we'll put a plan together, or we'll change our meeting rhythm, or we'll put new metrics in place. And those things by themselves are not bad, but if you have fractured relational dynamics, those things have very minimal impact. Can usually have very minimal impact.
And what you really need to get to is, like you said, is becoming a team together. That's what's going to make it. Building trust amongst the team members.
Oh my God,
building relations, a common view of the organization and the goals. Yeah, that's the hard things. Those are hard things to do. The easy thing is to fire somebody or move somebody.
It is. It's hard to rebuild trust, right, among two 50-year-old adults, right? It's hard, but it can be done. And often trust breaks, because trust is, do we trust that people have good character, and do we trust that they're competent at what they're supposed to be doing? And so oftentimes what happens when things break down is we make assumptions about people's competence. And that's, sometimes we're right, but most time we're wrong, right? And the assumptions come from, they do it differently than I would do it, or I don't like the way they did it, or I don't like the way they talk to me, or what, and it builds up and it becomes like, cement that you're getting your feet in. Assumptions are dangerous as hell, and they really do get in the way. because people are nuts, right? I mean, I wouldn't have a
People,
job if that
I
wasn't
say
the
that,
case.
I
I
say that in
am
my,
too. So
I say that in my books. I said people are messy.
yeah, that's for sure.
So,
Yeah.
so what other insights can leaders and readers hope to take away from this new book as they go through it?
Yeah. So I'd say there's three key takeaways. Make sure you don't just assume that you got a team. Often, move from staff. Think about this whole moving from staff to a real team. Uh, Secondly, there's two sides of a great leadership team. There's structural stuff and relational dynamics,
Yeah,
and they evolve over time,
I like
and
that.
and they are inextricably linked with each other. You
Yes.
can't, if you think about changing structure, you must think about what that impact and the dynamics are. If you think about adding a new team member or promoting a team member,
Yep.
you must think about how that impacts structure. Like, so
Yeah.
those relationships are crazy. And then I think the last thing is, and Gil and I, when we first started doing this stuff, we're like, yeah, I don't really think, the CEO, like the CEO shouldn't have to be that important to the team, or the president or the formal leader shouldn't have to be that important to the team. Teams should function as teams, right? But in a leadership team construct, the formal leader is absolutely crucial to how they enable the environment to happen.
Yep.
And so I'd say those three things are the three things that we hope people take away. And look, there's a path to getting to less dysfunction. There definitely is, but it's not easy. It's just not easy.
Well, I'm nodding my head because I've been through it many times,
I'm
and
sure.
I have success stories and I have failure stories.
Me too.
I have battle scars. But it is like you said, people are messy. They're, you've got these relationships, you have conflicting sometimes goals, you have functional heads. There's a lot of challenges, but when you do build a team and you are focused and you are unified towards a goal, you can do some amazing things.
You
So
can.
yeah, and I think that's, even if it seems like it's something that's hard to reach and difficult, I would say it's worth it when you get there. And I've had those moments where I've had a leadership team that was just firing all cylinders, and
Yeah.
it seemed like we could do no wrong. And
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah.
yeah, so when you get there, it's worth it, but it is not easy.
It's hard, and you have to nurture it, and you have to recognize as it changes every few months almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's why we get paid the big dollars.
That's right. That is right. Yeah.
Well, that's very good. So how can our listeners find out more about you, your company, and this new book?
Yeah. So our website's pretty easy. It's relationship-impact.com.
Mhm.
And our book website, it's on Amazon. It's called Building Great Leadership Teams. If you search Amazon, but there's a website for the book as well. It's called Building Great Leadership Teams. So it's pretty
Okay,
simple stuff.
good deal.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put links in the show notes for those resources, and again, listeners, I would say this is a big challenge when you're trying to build a leadership team. Don't just assume that just because you have a group of people that are your leadership team, that they're actually a team. So, Jack has brought up some really important issues that we've got to think about as we build these teams if we want them to be effective and not dysfunctional. Jack, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing this, all this information, because I think it's something we haven't really talked about much, but it's really important. These dynamics are really important if we want to take our companies to the next level. So I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all of this insight.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, John. I really appreciate you having me. You're good at this. It was an easy conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate the work that you're doing. This is very important.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.